I once heard that emotions, the word emotion stands for energy in motion. And basically what that means is our emotions are meant to be felt, be an observer of our emotions, notice it, but ultimately not give it meaning. So oftentimes we're really quick when we're experiencing intense emotions to label it as positive or negative. If we were to actually just notice our emotions, whether they were good or bad, we would allow them to just move through us and learn how to ride the wave of our emotions and not place a label on it.
We all know that what drives our lives a lot of times are our emotions. Emotions are a fact of life. They have ups, they have downs. The point is to be able to know how to navigate those, right? So, what we're going to go over in this episode of the Bridging Divides podcast is how to control our emotions, how to get through those difficult emotions. We're going to talk about 5 different tools to be able to help you manage those emotions and make sure that you're in the driver's seat instead of having your emotions in the driver's seat. I am your host, Mitch Bates. This is my co-host,
Lindsay Taylor with the Hope Institute.
We're very excited to bring you this episode today. So let's talk about emotions.
Okay, so I was telling Mitch that I once heard that emotions, the word emotion stands for energy in motion. And basically what that means is our emotions are meant to be felt, be an observer of our emotions, notice it, but ultimately not give it meaning. So oftentimes we're really quick when we're experiencing intense emotions to label it as positive or negative. If we were to actually just notice our emotions, whether they were good or bad, we would allow them to just move through us and learn how to ride the wave of our emotions and not place a label on it. Once we place a label, so for example, if you're feeling anger, once we place that label of, I don't want to feel this is a negative emotion, the emotion starts to get more intense. So if we could just observe the emotion and allow it to move like a wave, that emotion would ultimately fade. It's meant to be felt and moved through, not hung on to and labeled.
I remember my brother had told me one thing that really kind of stuck with me. I was learning how to kind of meditate and not, which what he was talking about, how the point of meditation isn't to not think or feel anything.
Right.
It's to allow yourself to feel good, bad. Like that's
Yep.
not the point.
Right.
It's feel it, analyze it, and then just kind of let it keep. He talked about it being a river.
Yeah.
Let it keep flowing. You know, it comes
Exactly.
in and then you kind of look at it and you observe and then you just kind of let it go. So, tool number 1,
Yeah. Ride the wave.
ride the wave.
Yeah. We want to treat our emotions as like a rising wave. So recognize the emotion, visualize it as a rising wave. You may peak. Let's say again, if the emotion is anger, you may hit a peak and it might be really intense. But knowing that that wave, if you just ride it, it's going to fall just like it rises. So noticing that it will naturally just diminish and let the wave flow and recede.
Yeah.
Ultimately, when you're experiencing emotions, just letting it flow and recede. And so ultimately, when we do this, it cultivates resilience and helps us get through challenging moments and difficult emotions. So the whole point of Ride the Wave is to really just treat your emotions like a rising and falling wave.
No, I love that. And it's like when we talk about like peaks and valleys, even that alone, we have this like connotation of like positive and negative. But again, it's
Yeah.
not like that. It's more like when the emotions are super strong and when the
Yeah.
opposite occurs. You
We
know?
really want to get into just being an observer of our emotions. We talked about that in a previous podcast when it
Yeah.
came to mindfulness. But that's a huge key, because when we can just be an observer and we're not placing judgment on our emotions, it totally changes how we experience those emotions.
100%.
Mhm.
100%. I love that. All right. Tool number 2.
Yeah.
Check the facts.
Check the facts. So oftentimes we treat our emotions as fact, and it's not. Our emotions are just their emotions. And oftentimes we place a narrative when we start to experience emotions. We start to make assumptions. And the reality is sometimes we need to check the facts around the situation. Does my emotion fit the reality of the situation?
Yeah.
Sometimes we blow up and we get angry over something when we can step back and look at it and maybe view it from a different perspective. We're like, oh, why am I so upset about that? Right? I'm going with anger as the emotion today. So check the facts. We walk through a few different steps. One of them is just acknowledging, what emotion am I struggling with? What emotion do I want to change? And what situations prompt this emotion? So Like if there is an emotion that you're like, man, I often feel anger, what situations prompt that emotion? And then you want to be able to look at what are my interpretations about this situation? What are my assumptions? What am I assuming about this? And that helps us to start checking the facts and gain a more realistic and maybe even different perspective than we initially had on the situation.
100%. And I
Mhm.
think it's like there's the reality of what happens, and then we all have these goggles on, how we
Mhm.
all perceive whatever
Right.
it is that's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times our emotions can distort those facts. And so it's like
Exactly.
if we can learn to take those off
Mm.
and just kind of go, okay, well, let's lay this out. And if you have to make a list, then make a list
Mhm.
to organize your thoughts. I really love journaling. It really helps me kind of process through things.
And in all of this, we're
It helps a
always
lot.
big on like validate your emotions. Like it's
Yes.
okay. Like if you do have a moment where that emotion gets intense and then you kind of later think about it, and you're like, all right, that really maybe wasn't necessary. We still need to validate the fact that we're feeling that. It's a matter of being able to look at it though and see it from a different perspective because that ultimately is going to help us as we face those situations again to then maybe better manage our emotions next time. And again, the
Hmm.
whole purpose is getting in the driver's seat and when we can start to balance our perspective, see things from multiple viewpoints, we're going to be able to better manage our emotions that way.
100%.
Another part of check the facts is asking yourself, are you assuming that there's a threat?
Hmm.
Sometimes there is no threat present, but we assume
Oh my
things.
gosh, I would do that. I would
Hmm.
anticipate
Right,
a threat before it
right.
was even happening. And I'm like getting worked up and I'm like, well, wait a second, hold on. No
This
one's
hasn't even
actually
happened.
doing anything. I'm just like, I'm starting to freak out
We can
preemptively.
all relate. Like that is
Yeah.
part of being human for
Yeah.
sure. And then what's the catastrophe? Because again, kind of like what you're saying, sometimes we catastrophize and there is no catastrophe, but we are catastrophizing with our projection, our future thinking. So that's another part of check the facts. And then does our emotion fit the intensity of the facts when we
Mm.
can kind of pull back and look at it?
Okay. So it's like once we're able to take
Hmm.
those goggles off,
Yeah.
look at all the facts, see them laid out, then we can go, okay, what is the appropriate response?
Yes.
Was it what I was doing? Or, how should I regulate that,
Yeah. And I
based
would
off.
say before you do this check the facts skill, you're going to need to take some breaths, calm down, use some stress tolerance skills, which we'll talk about in another episode. But you're going to need to do that first to just regulate or ride the wave and then get into more of the check the facts.
Well, yeah, because we can't be in that logic mode
Right.
when we're thinking
Emotionally. Yes.
emotionally, right?
Yeah.
Which we did talk about that with Jacob Sparks, which we should have him on again. I just
Yeah.
talked to him the other day. He's absolutely amazing, marriage and family counselor. He talks a whole lot about
Yeah.
regulating emotions and specifically how to work within a family setting.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. But he talks about that, how like when we're responding to, he's talking about children, but really just
Hmm.
people in
Hmm.
general, when we're trying to speak logic
Right.
to others and they're
In
in
high
that
emotion
high
state.
emotion state, it's not going to work. We
Yep.
have to wait until the emotions are regulated
Yeah.
and then we can go through the logic steps. We have to do that same thing with us,
Yeah.
with ourselves.
100%.
Take a breath, take a break, which again, next episode we will talk all about those crisis
Right.
management
Yeah.
moments.
Hmm.
But
Yep.
okay, tool number 3, opposite action.
Yeah, so we had did a DBT kind of overview video or podcast, and we did mention this skill, but this is just really it's pretty basic, but we underestimate the power of it. So you want to take the emotion that you're experiencing and what is the typical response or the typical action. So, for example, with anxiety, a very typical thing that we do is we avoid. And so, what we want to do in those situations when we feel anxiety and we're tempted to avoid is we actually want to take action. We want to do the opposite of what we're inclined to do because if we want to change the emotion, we've got to be willing to do something different,
Oh
take a
my
different
gosh,
action.
that just happened the other day at work. I had an coworker that I had said something and it triggered something of how he's feeling or whatever, and he just kind of explodes, and it was just like, oh my gosh, like what is going on? And I
Mhm.
noticed, after he just didn't want to talk about it. I was trying to apologize, and then it was like he just shut down, and then he was just like he didn't want to discuss anything,
Yeah.
and he just went right out the
Yeah.
door. and which I guess sometimes we need to,
Mhm.
again, take a break and take a
Yeah.
breather and
Yeah.
then readdress it.
Right.
The interesting thing is that it wasn't addressed and it
Mhm.
happened again the next day with a different coworker. And so
Mm.
it's just like, I don't want to judge
Right.
anybody, like, but I was just noticing a pattern. And the
Yeah.
more that you like delve into all these things, you'll be like, oh, hey, that person's doing this and that person's doing this,
Right. Right.
So not to
Right.
point fingers at anybody, but again, just to kind of observe what's happening.
Mhm.
I just noticed like, oh my gosh, like that
Yeah.
totally can happen. If we don't
Right.
revisit what's going on once we're in that better state of mind, then history is doomed to repeat itself.
Exactly. And if you keep taking that same action of avoiding, then you're never going to change
Mhm.
the emotion or how you handle things. And the whole goal of this is to become the driver,
Right.
not allow our emotions to drive our lives. So, prime example, and another one with anger, our typical reaction usually is to attack.
Yeah.
And so, opposite action of that would be avoid and distract. So, with anger, we want to take a step back. We want to take a break, distract ourselves to avoid the blowing up, the yelling, the attacking.
And I think that there's something to be there's so much to be said for that, to be able to get through that kind of an interaction, which some people
Mhm.
you can just write it
Mhm.
off if you're in
Mhm.
traffic or whatever and you just kind of like move on. There's no like, let's both pull over and like
Yeah.
talk this out while you cut
Yeah.
me off, but like with coworkers, with
Mhm.
bosses, with spouses, with children, with
Mhm.
whoever, you can't just leave things unresolved.
No, I like that you point that out. So, like, the whole idea of the opposite action with anger when we're talking about avoiding and distracting is just to be able to calm down from that moment so you don't blow up. But in those situations, it's really good when you're calm to go back and problem solve. So it's not just avoid and don't come back to it,
Mhm.
right? It's avoid so I'm not gonna blow up and then come back to it.
Yeah, let things cool
Mhm.
down a little bit and
Yep.
then we'll go
Yeah.
from there.
Right.
Going with the whole being in the driver's seat
Mhm.
imagery, emotions aren't it's not that they're not even supposed to be in the car.
Mhm.
They're important.
Right.
They're
100%.
messengers like
Yeah.
we have said before.
Yeah.
So they're supposed to be in the passenger seat
Mhm.
giving us directions.
Yeah.
Why am I feeling? What is it that is going on?
Yeah.
That is really what is going to allow us to get through. Why am I being triggered by whatever it is that's
Right.
coming up? Instead of just being like, well, I guess that's how my life is now, and that's just
Yeah.
what I'm triggered by. So
Or
there's a certain awareness that comes from that, which is good,
yes, yes,
but being able to use that information to then take
yeah,
control and then navigate through whatever it is that we're going through.
right. Well, that's where we learn and that's where we grow is when we allow those emotions to be our messengers. But when we are in control of it, then we're able to learn and take those messages and improve ourselves through that when we're in control. But if we're allowing our emotions to control, then that's where we're usually running into constant struggles
Mhm.
in our lives and roadblocks.
No,
Yeah.
100%.
Sadness, a typical response with sadness is to withdraw. So we feel sad, we might want to revert, withdraw. Yeah. And so,
Done that
opposite
before.
action of that is do something joyful, do a joyful activity. That can be really hard in the moment when you're feeling sad, but you need to do something that brings you joy to try and shift that emotion.
I think the big thing here is to be aware of what it is that we're feeling
Yep.
so that we can take the appropriate action,
Yeah.
or in this case, opposite action, right?
Right.
Because a lot of these things might seem contradictory, right? How do I know, if I'm supposed to take action? And how do I know when I'm
Mm-hmm.
supposed to take a step back? How do I know when I'm
Mm-hmm.
supposed to do this or that or whatever? It comes with practice.
Mm-hmm.
I can say that, very, very confidently. And I'm no pro, don't get me
Right.
wrong, but one of the things that the superpowers I think I've been developing is being aware of what it is that I'm feeling. Just
Yeah.
because as I've been through depression and like all of these different things, and I would say I'm kind of on the other side of it, but I've become way more aware.
Right.
And so it's like, well, wait a second, like what am I feeling? Like what is this kind of emotion? And
Mm-hmm.
then what are the appropriate responses? And there's a learning curve. Sometimes you're gonna do the wrong thing. I still do the wrong thing sometimes,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's like being able to at least recognize it, even
Mm-hmm.
post explosion,
Mm-hmm.
withdrawal,
Mm-hmm.
whatever choice we make that isn't the best,
Yeah.
even just recognizing that and going, okay, well, next time
Yeah.
I'm gonna do this.
Well, and I think it's important to remember that these are tools, and not every single tool is going to work for every single person,
Right.
right? Like
Exactly.
we take these things and apply them and see what works for you. Um, for certain people, opposite action might be a really helpful thing. For other people, they might be like, I'm more of check the facts, And so not all tools are going to work for all people, and that's very common. We
Screwdriver
teach these
versus
things,
hammer. It's like you're
right?
going to use them
You
for the same
teach
thing.
these things, and then you use what works for you.
Which, moving on to
Yeah.
step number 4,
Yeah.
are the ABCs of DBT, which
Yeah.
what we're talking about today is a step in dialectic.
Dialectical.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's
Dialectical
quite the word. Yeah.
behavior therapy.
Yeah.
And so we're going to talk number 4, ABCs of DBT.
Yes. So the fourth skill. So again, DBT loves their acronyms. So everything is an acronym. So
Helps
the A
remember.
stands for accumulate positive emotions. So again, we want to engage in activities that are going to bring us joy, well-being. If we're not doing those things, our mood and our emotions are probably going to suffer. Seems very simple, but we ultimately need to actually be deliberate and intentional about accumulating positive experiences, doing things each day that bring us joy. It's a really important thing. And oftentimes we put that on the back burner because life is busy and we're all in the rat race.
Oh,
A lot of
gosh.
us are. I shouldn't say all, but a lot of us.
Yeah.
And so just even taking a little bit of time each day to accumulate positive emotions through joyful activities.
No, perfect. I think that's great. Oh, so what's B?
So B is build mastery. So with this one, you want to take something that you might already do like decent with, and you want to build upon that. And the whole goal of this is that we want people to feel accomplishment, like, oh, I can achieve something. I can do this. It builds that like I can do this attitude, if you will.
Yeah.
So you just take something that you already maybe know somewhat how to do, and you just really work on building mastery with that thing. So that's the B part of it.
No, and
Mhm.
I think one of the big things here with this one is to
Mhm.
take, even if it's just small steps,
Yes.
right? The point is to
Yes.
take some sort of step.
Exactly.
So, it's I've noticed that even this just for me, like recently in my life, getting up and doing some push-ups in the morning. I
Yeah.
do not work out, which you guys know. I've talked ad nauseum about that. But being able to just get up,
Yes.
for the past 6 months probably that I've been doing it, just get up and I would do 5 push-ups, and then it kind of grew, and then it got to 10. I can do 50 now, just like pump them out, right?
Yes.
But that I was just talking to my wife about how just being able to say, I am able to form a healthy habit was a win for me.
Right.
So that I was like, okay, well now I can just apply that same principle to these other aspects of my life.
Totally.
Gives me more discipline and gives me, more of a confidence that I can do it. I believe in
Yeah.
myself.
So the build mastery part reminds me, and as you're talking of this thing that I heard through Chris Powell, he's like a weight loss transformation person, but he really believes in obviously the mental side of things is a big part of success in physical transformation. And so he talks about this idea of this power promise. And what that means is you set a goal each day. It could be as little as baking your bed. I'm going to make my bed every day. And the goal is to stick to that one goal that you set for yourself. The idea is to pick something that you can't fail at, that you're not going to quit at, so that you prove to yourself that I can keep a promise to myself. I can do this thing. I can build mastery. And so like when you said even just 5 push-ups, like something that feels doable that you could do every single day and follow through with.
Yep. And I probably could have started with more, but I knew that I could at least do that little
Yes.
thing. But then it just ended up building just on its own.
Because the whole goal with this build mastery is to develop a sense of accomplishment.
Yeah.
That builds our confidence
Big time.
when we can do that. And then the C is cope ahead. So it's just anticipate situations that maybe trigger difficult emotions inside of you. And what can you do? Like think ahead of time what I can do to cope in this situation. What skills can I use? I know I'm going to be going into this situation that triggers this emotion for me. What can I do to cope in that situation?
And that's different than what I was talking about with, catastrophizing or whatever
Right.
that word is that you said that was awesome.
Right.
But this is different than catastrophizing,
Correct.
and getting anxious about what happens.
No.
Explain the difference.
So when you're catastrophizing, you're going down the rabbit hole of like anxiety. What if this happens? What if
You're
that happens? You're
spiraling out of control.
spiraling. Yeah. What coping ahead is, okay, I know that I'm going to be going into this situation that makes me anxious. Okay, like I have to go give a speech, right? And in front
Mhm.
of this crowd. And I know that this gives me some anxiety. What can I do in that moment? I'm not thinking about all the what ifs of what's going to go wrong. That's catastrophizing, thinking of like what's going to go wrong. I'm thinking of how can I get through this effectively.
Okay, so you flip the script. So
Hmm.
instead of focusing on the external factors of what you can't control, you're focusing on what you can control.
Correct.
What am
And
I going to do?
yes, and coping ahead is imagining yourself coping well with it. I'm preparing to be able to get through this in a healthy manner. I'm not catastrophizing, thinking about the worst case
Mhm.
scenarios. That's the difference.
It's like the visualization aspect,
Hmm.
which there's so many
Oh,
different
yeah.
people, thought leaders, gurus, professionals that have talked about the value of visualization.
Right. Visualizing it going it
It
well.
going well.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. So we're going to move on to number 5
Tip number 5.
skill,
Yep.
tool, thing that we can use here,
Yeah.
which are please skills.
Please skills, another acronym. The PL stands for physical illness. So basically, what that's saying is we need to address our physical health just as much as we address our mental health and vice versa. Because oftentimes, if our mental health is suffering, our physical health is going to suffer and vice versa. So it's just making sure that we're taking care of ourselves physically.
Mhm. And a lot of times, at least for walking for me, it is a way for me to meditate. It's like the repetitive
Yes.
motion, that gets me kind of, I know kind of where I'm going, but I don't have to think about it. And so my mind automatically will just kind of like work through things.
Yeah.
It's a great
And then
way
walking
to
is a good way to help with your physical health. Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful,
Yep.
exactly. You can take care of both at the same time. But they
Exactly.
are they are equally as important. So what
Right.
does the E stand for?
E is balance eating. So some of these things, I think we underestimate how much these affect our emotions. So, believe it or not, like the food you eat, we do this whole lesson in our DBT skills group called Food in Your Mood. So, think about the things that you eat that negatively impact your mood.
Yeah.
So, you need to balance eating several meals throughout the day, watching the types of foods we eat that can mess with our mood. So, it's all about having a healthy balance when it comes to our eating. And it's not about eating healthy foods all the time, but it's just being mindful of what you're putting in your body. Food is ultimately fuel.
Yeah.
It does impact our mood. And so we just want to be mindful of that and make sure that we're eating good, balanced meals throughout the day and getting some sort of health benefits in the food that we're eating to ultimately help with our mood and our emotions.
No, I think that's great. And I think one of the things that we can also try to think of is like, why am I eating, right? Like if eating is your hurdle that you're working on, why am I eating right now?
Mhm.
And it's not to say that we can't have those little things that we
Yeah.
enjoy that might
Right.
not be the healthiest or whatever, or just like straight up guilty pleasure,
Hmm.
horrible, a cup full of Oreos with milk. That's my, just eat it like cereal. Like that's not to say that we
Yum.
can't do that, but
Yeah.
it's moderation,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Just being mindful, being aware of it, because I'm sure after you eat an entire thing of Oreos, what do you notice?
It's
It's time to take a nap.
it's really
Right. Right.
no, but that's
Yeah.
awesome.
And then
A,
the A,
yeah,
avoid mood altering substances. I mean, seems pretty common sense, but obviously alcohol and any sort of drug substances that will dictate our mood. That will affect our mood, I should say.
no, 100%. And I,
Mhm.
I think a lot of times, I mean, well, you just never know where that threshold is anymore,
Right.
right? So it's
Right.
like you might be like, well, I'm just gonna just this once,
Mhm.
or just one more time, or whatever it is,
Mhm.
but that could be the end of it, right?
Yeah.
It's like we need to avoid those decisions that are like final,
Right.
right? Like that deal
Mhm.
with that finality kind of
Right.
aspect,
Right.
because ultimately we want to be able to keep going and keep being able to
Yeah.
navigate through the trip that we're on,
Right.
right? Instead of driving off the road and just
Yeah.
having it be done,
Yeah. And
you
that's
know.
not saying you can never have a drink, right? I mean, we're not saying don't, but if you're struggling with your emotions and your mood, just being aware of that as a factor that, again, just like what you eat, that will influence how you feel emotionally and mood wise.
Yeah, again, it's like with the legal ones, right? It's like, why am I partaking in this moment?
Right.
Again, super, super
Yeah.
important.
The S is
Yes,
sleep hygiene. So,
I'm
again,
really good at this one.
one of those things that we underestimate, but that plays a huge role in our overall health and our mood So ultimately, you want to have a good sleep routine. They say that you should keep like a very consistent sleep schedule.
Mhm.
So that's important. And then obviously getting enough hours of sleep, which I think is hard in our world. I know I'm guilty of it, not
Oh,
getting enough
yeah.
sleep. But that I know for a fact I am super grouchy if I have not had enough sleep. So right there, my mood is totally
I
affected.
get weepy.
Okay,
So,
he's the
like
crier and I get angry.
yeah, 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 and my wife says that all the time, like, we have 6 kids, right? So she's been
Yeah.
pregnant a lot, and she's like, whenever she's pregnant, or whenever she has been pregnant, she's like, "Now I almost cry as much as my husband does." And I was just like, "Oh my gosh." But no, I noticed though, like,
Yeah.
when, like, I don't get that proper sleep where it's
Mhm.
like, whoa, like, I can really feel like a tug on, like, everything is just kind of it's like you're walking through a fog
Yeah,
trying to do
totally.
those, like, things that you're supposed to do, all the responsibilities that you have, or even just things that you normally would enjoy are
Mhm.
harder to do because you're
Yep.
dealing with that brain fog.
And we forget how much these play into our emotions is the bottom line. So
Yeah.
then the other E is exercise. Again, a very important thing, not only for our physical health, but our mental health. It's proven to reduce stress. I mean, it boosts our serotonin and dopamine levels in our brain, those feel good hormones. It's exercise is so, so important for improving our mood.
Amazing,
Mhm.
amazing.
Yep.
So, listen, guys, you can navigate the ups and downs. I know that sometimes it can be scary. It can be scary to see those coming in and you can anticipate them and then you get anxious about what's going on. But you can overcome those ups and downs and you can take control and be in the driver's seat of your life by applying these tools that we have talked about.
Yeah, I mean, I think a really important thing is just to keep in mind that emotions are messengers. And so they are not meant to be pushed away. They are meant to be felt. They are meant to be noticed. But you need to make sure that you're the driver in the driver's seat and allow those emotions to guide you, but don't allow them to take control. It's the biggest thing.
Keep them in the passenger seat. Well, we love you guys and we'll see you on the next one.
See ya.